Welcome back to Inside, a special edition of the program as we hear from the former director of the CIA, General David Petraeus. He's been speaking to our senior correspondent, Dana Lewis.
Before we move on from Iraq and Syria, are you concerned now that things are getting dangerous with Russia? Russia's talking about firing on American aircraft if American aircraft dare to drop a bomb on Syrian forces.
Well, I am concerned about that. Obviously, this ramps up the risk very, very considerably. Russia has not been a particular help in this developing humanitarian disaster, to put it mildly. They are allegedly the ones who bombed the UN humanitarian convoy that was in that area a week or so ago. They appear to be involved in the bombing of this is Grozny rules. This is very familiar from history. It's what took place in Chechnya at a certain point in time. So this is a developing humanitarian catastrophe of considerable dimensions.
Are you worried about something accidental happening with Russia and American airplanes flying in the same airspace, and with this tension mounting?
There are means for, again, ensuring that there's deconfliction, but also what happens if there is a no-fly zone, what happens if there is a declaration of a safe zone. I've actually advocated for a no-fly zone, although the introduction of Russian air power makes that much, much more complex, needless to say. But let's remember that we had a no-fly zone over northern Iraq to protect the Kurds and over southern Iraq to protect the Marsh Arabs and the Shia in the south from Saddam's Air Force for over 10 years. We know how to do this. We also could very much crater the runways from which Bashar al-Assad's Air Force takes off when they're on their runs, and deal with those assets that are dropping barrel bombs on the heads of innocent civilians as well.
You think the U.S. should be doing that?
I have advocated for saying that if the barrel bombs continue, that we ground his Air Force. You do it with standoff weapons. You don't even have to put aircraft over them. That's quite doable.
Afghanistan. 15 years now since the U.S. responded to 9/11 and started dropping bombs. The security situation, according to General Nicholson, has been deteriorating in Afghanistan. There's a high count of Afghan army losses, high count civilian losses are at the highest level, I believe, since 2001. Are you worried now that we're losing Afghanistan?
I am worried about the situation and the way it has been deteriorating, particularly up in Kunduz, another challenge up there. There are challenges in eastern Afghanistan and, of course, quite significant challenges in Helmand Province, an area in which we made considerable progress during the surge there when I was privileged to command the forces in Afghanistan, and which we've seen regained in some cases by the enemy. It's really quite a beleaguered province at this point in time. General Nicholson has been given greater authority to use air power than was the case some months back. That is a positive development. The President, of course, did not decide to withdraw the remaining U.S. forces. Or about what we have now will remain there, at least certainly until the next administration takes office. Keep in mind that we have accomplished a hugely important mission in Afghanistan, but it remains hugely important. And that is to ensure that Afghan soil is never again a sanctuary for al-Qaeda the way it was under the Taliban when the 9/11 attacks were planned there and the initial training of the attackers was conducted there.
And David, there have been no attacks on America from Afghan soil.
That is absolutely right. But it highlights again the importance of an enduring mission, but one that is sustainable. In fact, if I could draw out maybe at the end here and just give you 5 quick lessons that I think we should have learned from the last 10 or 15 years.
Please.
The first is that ungoverned spaces in a region that extends from North Africa through the Middle East and Central Asia, ungoverned spaces in these areas will be exploited by Islamic extremists. Not a question of if, it's just a question of when. Second is that what happens in these areas, Las Vegas rules don't apply. What happens there doesn't stay there. Rather, it tends to spew violence, instability, extremism, and in the case of Syria and some of the others, a tsunami of refugees, not just into neighboring countries in the region, but in the case of Syria and again North Africa, all the way into Europe and the Schengen zone and our NATO allies, causing enormous domestic political challenges. Third is, in responding to this, U.S. leadership is imperative. If you look at the assets that are proving to be the most valuable as we are helping host nation forces and others on the ground, it's this armada I spoke of earlier of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets. It's our precision strike assets and the ability to fuse intelligence and then advise and assist those that are on the ground. America has so many more of those than all of our partners put together that it's just absolutely vital that the U.S. lead. You should have a coalition. You also especially want Muslim countries in this. This is an existential threat to them, more so than it is a clash between civilizations. It's actually a clash within a civilization within the Muslim world. The fourth is that in responding to these terrorist groups, you have to do more than counter-terrorist force operations. You have to have a comprehensive strategy, which is really what we have evolved to now over time in Iraq. What we're doing now, and that comes to the fifth lesson, and that is that this is a struggle of a generation, not years, not a decade, a generational struggle. And that means that the strategy you employ, this comprehensive campaign, has to be sustainable. And I think what we have evolved to in Iraq is sustainable. Now we've got a campaign going that will again get rid of the extremists, although there will be terrorist cells and there will be guerrillas, acting as guerrillas or insurgents, if you will. The key is going to be Iraqi politics, and the Iraqis do have to do that for themselves. There can be assistance. Iraqis are going to have to rally around their prime minister, and they're going to have to rally around their young men on the battlefield and ensure that once they have sacrificed to achieve a foundation of security, that what's built on top of that helps sustain what they have sacrificed so much to achieve.
Last question on Europe. You're the former head of the CIA. You've seen these bloody, disturbing attacks in places like France. We're sitting here in London. Do you think the UK has just been lucky up until now? And what would you say critically about the intelligence services in Europe and the way they react to not only intelligence gathering, but they're able to act on intelligence quickly, or not so?
Well, as you know, there's no closer partnership in the intelligence world than that between the United States and the UK. There may be an element of luck in here for the UK, but I'd actually say it's much more an element of competence. MI5, MI6, the Home Office, the law enforcement agencies, and the integration of all that they do with a large joint counterterrorism task force, the sharing of intelligence and so forth is really exemplary. And that is what is keeping the citizens in this country safe. And knock wood that does continue because they have to stop everything, of course, and the bad guys only have to get through with one thing. With respect to the European services, the challenges there are unique to each country, but in some cases you have police forces in the same city that don't talk to each other or don't have a form of integrating what they know. There were practices that were clearly not made for the modern threats that we have now, where raids couldn't be conducted in a certain city during the hours of darkness. And so again, there's been some considerable examination of the practices of the legal authorities, of what the law enforcement elements and intelligence services are able to do. There have been improvements, but from talking with individuals who are working with them, there's certainly still some strides that need to be taken.
Thank you so much for your insight and for talking to us.
Great to be with you again, Dana. Thanks.
Well, Dana's with me in the studio. Interesting, Dana, I thought, about the idea, the call to action there was to take out the runways in Syria, to prevent Syrian jets flying. Wouldn't that put America, if they did that, really in a standoff with Russia?
Right, and he said that as he knew very well that the Russians, Martin, had already said that they were moving in these sophisticated anti-aircraft weapons and that they would consider any strike by American aircraft on Syrian forces an act of war, and they would respond potentially. A Russian general was saying that last week. So how do you do that? And I think that it's very important to listen to where he says standoff weapons. So he's saying we don't need to fly aircraft over
cruise missiles and the like, right?
Cruise missiles and others. You don't have to fly American aircraft over those bases, take out their runways, and ground, for humanitarian reasons, ground the Syrian air assets. So
that's certainly what he would like to do. Interesting also that he thought that the battle, at least on the military level with Daesh, was winnable. There was quite an optimistic tone he adopted there.
And I think it's important where you know, this is the former head of the CIA, where he talks,
in a very sophisticated way about the fact that Daesh was not like Al-Qaeda. I mean, they were an armed military force able to, with command and control, to take ground, hold ground. They declare the caliphate, but he says very quickly that is ending. And with probably the retaking of Raqqa and then Mosul, which he told me off camera he doesn't think will be very difficult at all for Iraqi forces. He said they have the muscle and they can do it.
He believes that arc of territory through Syria into Iraq can be smashed apart.
Smashed apart very soon, very easily. The question is what happens after that. So Daesh will cease to exist as a main military force, but they will continue on as an organization, much like Al-Qaeda.
Because as one of his lessons was, wasn't it, is if you don't do something with territory after you've taken it or disrupted what's there, then it just goes into a dark zone and anything can happen.
Right, and I think the other point he makes is, okay, we retake Mosul, then what happens?
Yeah.
If the Iraqi government does not make amends with the other minorities and ethnic minorities in that area, it'll all just unravel again anyway.
Dana, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the interview. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.